Hello and welcome to this United Soccer Coaches presentation in our series 11 versus 11 Formations and Systems of Play. I'm Ian Barker, the Director of Coaching Education for United Soccer Coaches, and our presenter today will be my colleague David Newbery. This is a presentation where we'll be discussing the formation, the 1-3-5-2, and how that formation becomes a system based on the principles of play. This is one presentation in a total of 6, an introductory presentation, a concluding presentation, and then 4 sandwich presentations, each looking at a different base formation, again today being the 1-3-5-2. David will discuss the functionality, characteristics, and numbering system. He'll discuss how this formation becomes a system. And then we will also provide you with training activities that go along with the series. And briefly at the end of this, we'll discuss the potential strengths and weaknesses of this formation, the 1-3-5-2, as we employ it as a system. And what we'll do now is we'll turn it over to David, and he will discuss some of the basic shape and numbering of his interpretation of this formation.
Thanks, Ian, and coaches, welcome. This is the 1-3-5-2, and let's start with talking about some of the numbering and how the team is set up. And it's worth mentioning that this is a particularly difficult system to work with young players, particularly those that are non-elite, primarily because of the 3 central midfield players. And when we talk about the attacking activities, we'll talk specifically about how those 3 players interact and the roles that they play. But I do find this very difficult to work with young players because you may be able to get 1 or 2 of the central midfield players working, but it's always difficult to get all 3 working exactly how you want them. But as we can see, the first line is the goalkeeper line, the number 1.
Moving through.
The second line has the 3 defenders, and you can see here that I've set them up in quite a narrow formation. We have a fullback, number 2, and number 3, left and right, and then we have a central defender, number 4. The third line could be looked at as one line or multiple lines, but I've demonstrated in the first diagram here as one line with the number 7 and number 11 providing the team with its width, and then the number 6 playing more defensive in the midfield, and number 10 and 8 playing more left and right and higher in support of the strikers. Another interpretation is 2 lines in central midfield with a line A and a line B, the line A being the deeper line with the number 6, and then the line B being a higher line with the 7, 10, 8, and 11. And then finally, we have the strikers line, line 4, and as you can see here, I've numbered them both number 9, and that's relevant from the perspective that I want them to perform a very similar role within this system. If we were wanting to play with a slightly different system with our 2 strikers, then we could number possibly 2 number 10s. But in this system, I like to play 2 high players that remain high and provide us with an outlet when we win possession.
David, you suggested a stagger of the 3 central midfielders. What about the back 3? Do you see them more side by side, or do you see the potential of a sweeper?
I like 3 central defenders to play as a 3 central defender unit without any player playing lower or deeper in this system.
Okay, thank you.
So let's look at now the attacking shape, and as the ball moves forward, you can see here with the number 7 in possession of the ball, you will see that we have the highest 2 players are still our number 9s, our strikers, and we are now starting to receive high support from the 7 and the number 8. So we've really committed 5 players to the attack. The difference being is that I like to defend or attack with defense in mind as a coach, and so I've asked my number 11 on the weak side of the play to tuck in centrally and not play quite as high as the other players in the central midfield position. And defending, so this is one of the things that I really like to do with the 3 defenders and the 5 midfield players, and that's played very, very narrow. Here we have the number 2 putting pressure on the ball. The player in blue has the ball, and the number 2, the deeper right-sided player, will now play high in order to put pressure, because having committed our number 7 and our number 9's high, often they are in a recovery mode when the ball breaks the lines of midfield. And these arrows here represent a shift. So, of course, we want our players to drop and recover. That's important. And as they drop, they then shift over to the side of the ball.
And I think this slide, David, preempts a discussion we'll have a little bit later about a team principle of defending, which is team compactness. So I think these arrows here give our coaches a little idea of how we'd like the team to be connected defensively, making the field increasingly smaller.
Yes, and I think this diagram demonstrates it very well. If you look at the area covered laterally and horizontally, it is a very, very compact defense, probably based on this diagram, the width of the penalty box.
Absolutely. And one of the things I like to talk about in any defending system is if all of our players, as demonstrated here, have made 10 or 15-yard recovery runs, we can be effective. If 1 or 2 players, let's just say the number 11 doesn't come across, or another player doesn't come across, then everybody has to make large recovery runs. So this is really based on the notion of a compact team defense. And I think this captures it very nicely. So, David, this was a preferred system for you, a preferred formation for you. I'd like you now to dig in a little bit deeper about some of the nuances and how you might employ this with your youth teams.
Absolutely, Ian. And it's worth mentioning here that we all as coaches have interpretations on what formation we wish to play, and then how that morphs into a system. This is my interpretation of how I like to play the 1-3-5-2, and it might not work exactly like that for another coach. So here are 5 reasons that I like it, and you can decide whether you like it as well. First of all, from a defensive perspective, we are able to provide sustained pressure in the opponent's half, primarily because we commit so many players forward. So crucially, when we lose possession in the attacking third of the field, my objective will be to win the ball back quickly. One reason why is because if the team is allowed, the opponent is allowed to play in behind our midfield, then we are reasonably well exposed, having committed so many forward. The second reason why I like this system is that we like to try and play with our 2 number 9s very centrally, with the idea that they occupy the central defenders of the opponent's team. So if the team is playing, the opponent is playing with 4 at the back, which often they do, then the 2 central defenders will have to occupy the 2 strikers. And this leaves room on the outside for our number 7 and our number 11, particularly if our strikers are good strikers, because that will then keep in mind and draw in the fullbacks to provide some level of cover for the central defenders.
And it occurs to me as I listen to your explanation there that the 2 forwards, be they playing against a back line of 4 or 3, the 2 forwards really pose problems, because either the team has to match up man to man, or they can potentially 2 of them off balance 3-player backline. So the 2 forwards really does pose an interesting problem, especially in the youth game.
Absolutely, and as we saw, that if we have wide players 7 and 11, it means that those players will be drawing out the fullbacks inevitably, particularly if we can get them to play high. In this diagram, we have the 3 central midfield players pushing forward in support of the number 9. And so the combination possibility between the 9s and the 8 and 10 and the number 6 are endless. And then when we throw in the ability for us to get the 7 and 11 involved, then it does make a potent attacking threat for our team when we're playing in this system.
And certainly the number 6 seems to be a little bit more conservative as opposed to the 8 and 10. And I assume that's referring back to your notion of being prepared to defend, allowing you to win back possession quickly and continue to attack.
Absolutely. The number 6 is so important to this system. We see in the modern game that the number 6 becomes very important in the counter-attack because they provide a shield to our defense. And so the 6 needs to be able to move certainly laterally more than they do necessarily horizontally. So as the 10 and 8 commit to go forward, then the number 6 holds. There are times, of course, when the 6 is just in a position to support, and then the number 10 or number 8 needs to understand the role of the 6 in order to provide some level of cover. And then this reason is where I like the 3 at the back. Often in a 4 at the back, at least 1, possibly 2, and sometimes 3 of the defenders will not have a direct player to mark. And in this system, we can start to assign marking responsibilities for the 3 defenders. The 4 will often pick up players if we're not dropping them into a sweeper role. If that is the case, the 2 and the 3 will pick up strikers, but also we can get our defenders, our right and left sided players, once we are organized as a defense, to then push into providing support to the midfield as well. So I like the 3 at the back. I like to keep them narrow initially while we get organized. And once we get our support back in the central midfield, the 6, the 8 and the 10, then we can start to be a little bit more expansive in our defense with our 2 and 3 supporting in wider and higher positions. And our final reason why I like this, amongst many, is that our 5 midfield players match up very well to the system of most opponents and often will overwhelm 4 in midfield. So this goes back to my previous point about the importance of the 3 central midfield players really understanding their role, both attacking and defending, but very much the role of the number 10 and number 8 getting into support positions, both wide when the 11 has it and the 7 has it, but also getting in support centrally when the 2 9s are receiving the ball, and then, of course, creating those devastating combinations.
5 really solid reasons. I think you made your case well there. So what we'd like to do now is refer back to the attacking principles of play and later the defending principles of play, and how those principles can potentially be applied to this formation, and again, as it becomes an evolved system. So here are our principles of attack, and David will briefly cover them.
Yeah, so 5 principles of attack, depending on where you come from and what association you're affiliated with. There may be more or less principles, but these are the 5 we use with United Soccer Coaches. Penetration, the idea of getting in between or over or around the opponent, the opportunity to provide support to players receiving the ball, providing height and depth and width, which is really important. Mobility, the opportunity for our players to move in and around, to stretch an opponent, to provide support and speed and quickness around players with possession of the ball. I mentioned width, and then eventually improvisation, which is certainly the hardest principle for any coach to coach, but we'll provide some examples as we go through this presentation.
And very much these principles, they're in this order with a solid reason. So penetration, the person on the ball; support, the immediate help; mobility and width for everybody else trying to open up the opponent; and then ultimately the magic source, the ability to score a goal.
Yeah, and so, I look at this order, Ian, as a way to introduce these with players as well. So for our youngest players entering the game at 3, 4, and 5 years old, penetration is exactly where they start, by learning to dribble, to beat an opponent and to escape pressure.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about penetration as it relates to the game environment and specifically this system. I like to start off by looking at the defensive unit. Our goalkeeper, our number one, is playing outside of the box when the ball is in the opponent's half. This is really important in this system, particularly because any ball that is played over the top, and opponents do like to play the ball long when they're playing against three at the back to try and turn them, the number one has to be comfortable with their feet. And then the three central defenders, as I mentioned, play relatively narrow to begin with as we organize. So as we're moving up the field, the 2, the 3, and the 4 will play certainly within the width of the penalty area and even in the width of the 6-yard box.
And the ultimate penetration here has demonstrated the shot at goal. So we at the end of the day, we're always remembering that's where we're trying to get to.
Absolutely. And as we move forward to create that shot, we see that we have the 8 and the 10 providing high support. So as soon as the ball exceeds or is in advance of the midfield line, it's really important for our 8 and 10 to be up in close proximity to the number 9s. And as a coach, that's one of the most difficult things for any coach to defend against, when the number 9 receives the ball with their back to goal and you've got quick, skillful 8s and 10s working within 10 yards proximity, because that can be really quite scary for slightly less mobile central defenders.
The support obviously here is highlighted, presented primarily by 8 and 10, but 11 and 7 are involved in this potentially as support players for sure. So let's look a little bit at width and mobility.
Well, let's just finish off this discussion on attacking penetration. And what we'll see here now is the 7 has cut in off the sideline and played the ball into our 9. And now we create this nice combination to release the second number 9. So that's one of the beauties about having 2 players up front that play similar roles. They stay close together and they both become trained and accustomed to one dropping deep and then one looking to make a run beyond the ball. So let's talk about height and depth. So the concept of height is that we want the number 9s to stretch the defense as deep into their half as possible. With that said, we also would like to see that our central defender and our 2 fullbacks are in a position where they can provide depth so we can maintain possession of the ball and switch fields. So as you can see here in this diagram, we've done exactly that. We've tried to penetrate down the left. The defender has done well to reverse it. So now we've played across the back line and get the ball out the other side. And because we have the comfort of the 6, the 2, the 3, and the 4 in defense, we can afford to push our number 7 and number 11 wide and high. The 3 central midfield players, as the ball is moving, are staying in close proximity, but we can start seeing now here how the 10 and 8 are starting to develop with the 6 at the bottom of the triangle. And one of the things that's more difficult to train younger players is the idea of depth, because they're always looking to go forward. But if we can get the players to understand the concept of depth, then this provides us the opportunity to switch fields from one side to another. And one thing to consider here is the time it takes when we play the ball back to the 3, potentially through the 4 to the 2, or can we switch fields by the number 4 dropping deeper, becoming the pivot, and then that player playing out to the 7. So at the highest level, we see this often where the fullbacks don't get involved too often in switching the point of attack. We use the central defender for that purpose. But of course, they have to be able to be comfortable on the ball and be able to have a great range of passing.
And in this diagram, I think it's quite clear that there's a lot of staggering of players and a lot of angles and depth. There really isn't any example in this picture of 2 players standing directly in the same line across the field. So I think that suggests the importance of depth and stagger when we've got meaningful possession.
Yeah, Ian, I think at the beginning we talked about 4 lines. Really, you could almost talk about 11 lines if you start to work out how the players are moving in between the lines of the opponent.
Yeah.
So here we are, a mobility. Mobility in this case is the ability for us to get our midfield players beyond our strikers. In this case, as you can see in the diagram, we have both the number 9s dropping deeper, and that's now creating the opportunity for our number 4, who, by the way, seems like a great player because they can switch the play all over the place. In this case, chip the ball over the opponent into the path of our number 8. Our width comes from 2 players predominantly, a number 7 on the right and our number 11 on the left. Those players, in the way I like to play the system, almost exclusively remain within about 4 yards of each of the sidelines, because we have plenty of players playing in the center. But once these players start coming inside, now we have no width. And what I like to talk about my wide players is starting wide and then the ability to cut in. If we are always chasing, if the pass is played wide and our wide players are always chasing, then by the time they reach it, the defenders are more likely to have been in contact and putting pressure on our player that is running away from the ball towards the touchline. And then improvisation and creativity, and this is, of course, diagrammed in a game. There are activities that we can use to create flicks and movement patterns that are creative. But one of the things that is demonstrated here is the relationship between the 2 9s, 1 9 receiving the ball and coming short. And instead of running beyond the partner up front, the other striker has actually run underneath an underlapping run and received the ball in their path. Just as a drop back, which is extremely devastating at the highest level. We see it all the time with high quality players just receiving it off the toes of their partner and then dribbling in, beating the opponent and having a shot at goal.
So we like to tee up the presentation with the big picture of what the 11 players on the field would like them to execute. But what we have to do now is break it back down into smaller component parts and how we would train it with frequency, with smaller numbers, to establish the patterns and routines that hopefully we'll start to see on game day. So let's take it now to a few of the potential attacking activities and training games we might use to achieve what David has so nicely laid out.
Ian, from my perspective, when I try to plan as a coach, what I try to do is look at what we're trying to achieve in terms of our outcomes first, and then use that information to help us to then select the content, not vice versa. I don't know if that is the way that you also approach it?
Absolutely. I think initially, if we don't know the team or we're beginning coaches, we pull some activities from the website or from our DOC's curriculum, and we just do a session. But as we become more effective team coaches, we have to have a really good sense of the outcome. We have to have a really good sense of what our players can and can't do. And then we pick the training activities based on the players and the formation and system. We don't lead with the selection of activity and just hope that it works on a Saturday. So I'm very much with you on that one.
Yeah, and so activity number 1 is exactly that. You can see we've applied numbers to the field. So we have the system as we've laid out. It's quite a narrow field, so of course the 7 and 11 would have much more room to work, but we've placed them on the outside of the field here. So they're not involved in the main thoroughfare of the grid. But what we do also have here is the number 6 on the ball, deeper. We've got the 10 and 8 supporting, and then we have the number 9s in central position. And we've got the other team coming back the other way. And this one's just about pattern play. So developing some of our attacking and passing combinations as we move forward. The number 6 kicks it off, passes the ball into the number 9 that starts off in the center of the area in partnership with the other number 9 at a central cone.
Moving along.
So as the ball is played into the number 9, the number 9 drops the ball back into the support player. So we saw that in the coaching in the game methodology. And now the number 9 has moved forward into a much more advanced position In fact, both number 9s have moved forward, and that is allowing us now to create combinations higher up the field with the idea of getting in our wide players to be involved in this case, playing the ball over the top into the end zone where the other number 9 has received the ball. And like any activity, when we're doing shadow play or pattern play, we want to try and get to the point where we apply pressure. And now, instead of having 2 teams working simultaneously on different directions, now we have a 7v7 situation with the players now competing against each other. This is directional, so we are looking at the number 9s on both teams playing in their role high, and the same with our 6. They're going in one direction, and if they win it and they score, then either we give the ball back to the opponent and they come back in the other direction, or we restart at the end of the grid in the right direction. So for the red team, they're always going in this direction. If they score, and I like to do this, if they score, give them the reward of going again. They then have to get back into position, and they restart from the end of the grid that they started the previous sequence.
And it seems so fundamental, but I think it's something we all forget at different times. A great supply of soccer balls at either end of the activity. Hopefully every player brings a ball to training. Not a lot of time chasing down balls. You keep the activity flowing because you've just set it up correctly and with good organization. So I think this little graphic just helps remind us of the importance of a clear setup for sure.
Yeah, in our club, Ian, with soccer balls, they're at a premium, and certainly having a large bag of balls for every single team is so critical if we're going to do anything attacking focused, because there's nothing worse than having to stop the activity, collect the 5 balls that you have, restart. If you've got 20 balls all lined up, then you can keep going for whatever amount of time you think is appropriate. Here we are. On the second activity, now we're looking at phase of play. So with a phase of play, we're trying to join units of the team and playing in this case, half the field. And this activity is developed with the idea that we have a pattern of play that we want to introduce with our team. The only player on our team that isn't shown here is our goalkeeper, because we are playing in the attacking half of the field, but everyone else is involved. So we got our system out here, and now we're working on our attacking patterns. And this one, we play with our number 4 straight up to our striker, who checks to receive the ball, drops the ball back to our 8, and then here we have that move that we looked at in the previous coaching in the game sequence has actually made a run forward to receive the ball, and look at that, perfect in the corner.
Always perfect when you get to create the diagram, David. So that's great.
Absolutely. We definitely want to get them scoring goals. And as we can see here, look, second diagram, we also have scored a goal, but this time in the other corner. This strike is certainly going to be worth a bob or two. But the second sequence now, we've decided to create a pattern going wide. So there's now 2 passes before we reach the number 7 in wide position. But look how wide the number 7 has started. And over on the other side, the number 11 started wide as well. Before it was known that we're going down the right-hand side. Now, sometimes, and as I mentioned before, I'd like to try and see if can the number 4 get the ball out there, because that transition would be much quicker than trying to make a second pass through. But for young players, it's a good idea to try and use the fullbacks, because they're not going to be able to pass the ball accurately and with the consistency of an adult playing the ball wide into those positions. I like to get the 2 wide players, 7 and 11, high up the field as starting positions. They become essentially a line of attack with the number 10 and number 8, and then, of course, keeping the number 9s high. And then the other thing to look at in this diagram, we do have an assistant that is keeping track of offsides, and the mannequins are there just to provide us with some sense of defense. And we've also included a couple of yellow players that are providing some resistance as well. But to begin with, the pressure is relatively passive, and we have only 2 active players on the field. And then the final diagram, we have another combination, another way to get forward, this time involving both the wide players, the number 7 and number 11, and we've used the number 9 to become the pivot to work the ball out the other side. Now that's quite challenging to do, because as you get closer to the goal, of course, the compaction of the defense around their goal and around our players becomes more significant. You may want to work on other ways to get the ball across the field. One, using the number 6 as a pivot, because no one in the modern game seems to worry too much about the involvement of the 6 as an attacking force when we get close to the edge of the area. And then, of course, even less likely to be defended is the number 4 as a central defender. So the third diagram in the attacking principles section and the final sequence is looking at the ability of our team to get the ball wide. In this case, you can see the number 1 has thrown the ball wide to our number 7, who can then attack down the channel, wide channel, with an objective of getting the ball delivered into the box, or alternatively switching fields and getting the ball out to the other wide player. So the setup is a half field, essentially with 2 penalty boxes, 2 teams, and the players set up again based on our system with a number 9, 1 number 9, 2 wide players, 11 and number 7, our 3 central midfield players, and the keeper. So this is an activity looking at the attacking half of the field, and we've included goalkeepers at both ends because that provides some level of realism. And having got wide, the number 7 now makes a cross back into the middle of the box for our number 9, 10, 8 to be crashing in, and number 6 has taken a good position up on the top of the box in case the ball is cleared, and our number 11, having realized that they're not going to be involved directly in the play, is making a late run to come in and score. And as a player that played often in that role, I can assure you that's a really good place to start coming in, because no one picks you up late, and you often get the chance to score.
And what it occurs to me, David, is that as you've gone to bigger numbers and you've had to split your squad, because your theme is width, you must have 7 and 11. And you've chosen to keep the integrity of your midfield. And because of numbers, you've sacrificed one of your number 9s. So even though in the final analysis you'll play with 2 strikers, for the purposes of developing wide attack, it's more critical to make sure you've got the 7 and 11. And if you're going to sacrifice a player, in this case, you sacrifice one of your strikers.
Yeah, and if you look at the point system on the left-hand side, we create a point system to encourage width. So that's one of the methodologies you can use as a coach, is add points or conditions that emphasize your particular theme, in this case, the width. And in this case, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players playing for our team. We can certainly add in an extra player, 7v7, because we are playing the full width of the field anyway. So we could add all of our complement of players, and of course we will build up to that eventually to finish off with a game. And as you can see, as we go now transition back the other direction, the blue team get the opportunity to score in exactly the same way, with the player that was waiting behind the goal bringing on the ball, and then that triggers an attack in the opposite direction. So a really good, fun activity. Kids love it, getting forward, scoring lots of goals, and from a coaching perspective, it does meet the purpose of your trying to imprint your formation and system with your team. So
we move from the attacking principles of play to our defending principles of play, and then David will go into the how they're applied in the 1-3-5-2. But I'll just take this real quick. So we line them up in opposition to the attacking principles. So if the opponent's trying to penetrate, we must apply pressure to try to deny penetration. If the opponent is supporting the person with the ball, trying to help them, we must try to help our teammate putting pressure on by providing cover to create 2v1 defenses. If the opponent is getting wide and is moving, we have to balance off the threat of the ball, the opponent, and space. So we're always looking to balance off the challenge of width and mobility. and at the same time, of course, stay compact, make the field small. And the wonders of creativity and improvisation on the strikers has to be met by patience, discipline, and restraint on the part of defenders who have a much more honest job to do, if you will. And that is said from the point of view of somebody who played as a defender all of his amateur career.
Yes, Ian. So part of the game that, as coaches, doesn't generally excite us as much as the attacking side, same with our players, but is equally, if not more important. So here we are looking at the first principle, pressure. And one of the things I mentioned in the introduction is the importance of playing pressure high in the 1-3-5-2, because we've committed so many players forward that we need to try and get a turnover and at very least delay the attack in high positions. So we see that the 3 midfield players around the ball, the 10, the 8, and the 7 get close to their immediate marks. The number 9, one of the number 9s comes over to help play double team or to try and force the ball back. And then on the weak side, we have the number 11 just tucking in to help and provide some support. Cover is an important principle, and part of the activities you'll see in a few minutes will be the idea of recovering into a cover position. We have the number 6 and number 8 that is providing cover for the person that's closest to the ball, in this case the number 7. And notice the position of the number 8 is goal side and ball side of the number set of the player with the ball. And that's really important because this number 8 may be able to step in and intercept the pass if it's under hit. Equally, look at the position of the number 6 again, goal side, meaning goal side, our defensive goal, and ball side of the defender in the middle of the midfield. Balance is provided in the case of the 1-3-5-2 by the defender, the wide defender on the weak side of the team, and also the wide midfielder on the weak side of the team. So in this case, we see the number 11 is putting pressure on the ball. The number 3 working as a pair, as a unit, is now providing some immediate cover, as is the number 6, the number 10. Number 9 is getting back and trying to support from the front, at the same time trying to cut the back pass out. But we now have balance provided with the number 2 getting across. And the key thing about balance is, if the player on the ball was able to beat either on the dribble or pass the number 3 and the 4, can the number 2 get across to become the last line of defense with the goalkeeper? And similarly, the same with the number 7. Can the 7 get back and support the number 2 if the number 2 was beaten? So that's a big ask in the 5 midfield, because the 7 is asked to do a lot of running, both forward and back. But if we can find the right players, then this system is an extremely good one for both attacking and defending. Compactness is created by a couple of things happening. One is that the players in the front line, the 8, the 10, and the 2 9s, start to work themselves back, make recovery runs, and at the same time, the defending unit of the 2, the 3, the 4, and the wide players move forward. At the same time, we want the players to move infield as well. So that's how we create the compactness. And as the diagram shows with the yellow box, we are covering a relatively small area of the field with all of our players. And worth noting is the position of the goalkeeper, who's now out of the box, ready for the ball that's played over the top. In this case, the ball is still on the right-hand side of the opponent's attack. Our left-hand side, our number 11, has come and applied pressure. Now, we could try to start winning the ball here, but we could also look at this situation and say, can we get a little bit more organized as a defense? So there may be some cues to suggest that the blue team is now starting to penetrate in positions that makes us a little bit more vulnerable. And now we want to delay the attack and provide us with a bit more time to get in an organized position. And that can be done by forcing the ball backwards to the goalkeeper once it's received in wide positions. Or we could drop back with all of our defense and create a line of confrontation around the circle and allow the opponent to play in front of our forwards and our midfield players.
So we've got a pretty good sense then of the principles of defending and how they could apply in the big picture. Let's look at a couple of little training games, training activities that could break that down that we can use to build it up towards the final game.
Yeah, so this activity is 5v5 or 7v7. A couple of things to note. One is we don't have any goalkeepers, and we also have a halfway line. So the deal is that the team in possession of the ball must commit 3 players over the halfway line in order to score. So in order for that to happen, of course, we have to get some decent possession, and we also need to penetrate beyond the lines of the opponent's team. Or if they drop back far enough, then of course we can get our players and the ball in the half of the opponent. We have numbered the players, both teams, similarly. So we are using the functionality of the 1-3-5-2 system. And importantly here, we've got the 8 and the 9 that, having scored a goal, now create a transitional moment so that the team now in possession of the ball, the blue team, can bring the ball forward with a 5 versus 3 advantage until the 8 and the number 9 recover. So we talked about this before, that the players 8, 9, 10, 7, and 11 may be committed high up the field. If they break our lines, then we need to recover quickly, and we need to train the players on how to recover. The second diagram shows that the blue team have managed to move forward as the 8 and 9 are recovering. The 6 has done a decent job in slowing down the blues' attack, and we are now in decent position with our number 2 and our number 4 dropping deeper to protect our goal from easy shots. And look at the work now that's been put in by our number 8 and our number 9 to now get into a goal side position. The challenge for them is, how do they decide on whether they go wide and start to try and track the number 4, or come inside and try and double team and put pressure on the ball in central positions.
And a moment of transition, I think, in our next slide.
Yes, Ian. So here, the good work of the red defenders has won the ball, and now we are playing forward in transition. And unlike the red defense, the blue defense hasn't organized themselves quite as quickly and allowed the number 8 on red team to get in behind and play a really great cross for the number 9 to come in and finish. And I believe that's now 2-0. Let's now turn our attention to a slightly different game. This one's about high pressing. So we've talked about how our team, having lost the ball, now need to try and win the ball back in high positions. And this is a good activity for that. And we're looking now at the blue team. We have the 11, the 7, our 2 wide players. We have the number 9, our striker. And then we have our midfield players coming from central positions. In this case, our 8 and 6. We dropped the number 10 for now to create the 7. And we also have our 2 and the 3 who must remain in the defensive end. And in the corners, we have targets for both teams. We have 1 goal in each of the 4 corners, a small goal just offset off the end line. And the idea here is that once the coach plays the ball in to the white team, they've got to try and maintain possession and make 3 passes. If they do, they score a point. Once they've done that, they can then go to goal at the opposing end. So the whites would try and score in these 2 goals. The blue team have to try and disrupt that play, of course, and they can send in the players into this box to try and win possession, and the coach can decide how many players can go in. So of course the 9's already in there, and here we can see 1, 2, 3 players moving in, playing a 5 versus 4 with 5 whites against 4 blues as they trying to make those 3 passes. And because this is a defensive focus activity and my team always wins, the blue team now have 1 possession, and the 7, the 9, and the 11 have combined and scored a goal. There isn't a required number of passes that need to be made if you win possession of the opponent. So we could have gone straight to goal, but in this case we made a couple of passes before the 11 scores. And then finally, we have a situation here where the pressure in this end box was pretty significant, and the whites did a good job of stopping the blues go to goal. And as I mentioned before, we've got to try and encourage our team sometimes to retain possession and not worry about going forward, because trying to go forward might lose us possession. So here we have decided to keep possession and use the players we had in our own half of the field, in our defensive half, and we work the ball back between the 2 and the 3, and now we can rebuild the attack going back in that direction. And our final activity for defending is looking at patterns of play. So we looked at patterns of play as they relate to the attacking side of the ball. Now we can work on the pattern of play as it works on the defensive side. And I've worked quite a lot on this with my teams, and it has worked on wonders, and it could only be a 5-10 minute segment of a training session. And the way this works is that we can use players, or in this case mannequins, and we give the mannequins numbers as we do opponents. So we have got the number 1, the number 2, number 3, and so on and so forth on the mannequins. And we've got our whole team, our 11v11, and what happens is that the coach may just shout out number 2, and if that happens, all of the players will now defend in the shape as if the number 2 has possession of the ball. And as we can see here, the number 11 in our system, we like the 11 to try and press high, to try and put some pressure on the number 2. So they're the first defender. Our number 10 and our number 6 start to move into balance positions. Our 3 defenders become more compact. Our number 7 drops in and provides balance in the midfield, with one of the number 9s playing high, remaining high, so that if we do win a turnover, we can counter-attack and have a player that we can play to in the outlet.
And now we have a different scenario where you're asking them to recover to a player higher into our half.
Yes, absolutely. So not always are we going to have the ball in front of us. Sometimes the opponent will penetrate in between our lines. Here they penetrated between the attacking and midfield lines. The ball's gone into the number 10, and now we're adjusting our position off a more central and higher position. So in this case, we want our defenders to worry about defending some of the players on the opponent's side of the ball. Our number 11 is now tucking in. Our number 7 has made a recovery run to tuck in. And here we have our number 9s running back, working back to try and provide us with some support in case the opponent wants to try and keep possession by playing back deep towards their fullbacks.
And number 6 here, probably advised to try just to deny the opponent and allow 7 and 11 to get in. If 6 tries to win the ball and is unsuccessful, the team could be potentially exposed. So that notion of when to win it and when to just simply delay and deny, I think is something you could address here for sure.
Sure. Patience is certainly a virtue when it comes to the role of the number 6, and their ability to deny and delay allows our other players to get back. And that's particularly important, as I mentioned before, with our players playing high. We want them to try and give us as much time as we can to get back in to those recovery roles. And then the second diagram actually, I think this is diagram 3. We now have removed the mannequins, and we can, before we go into the full pressure game, we can just have the opponents move liberally around the field. And the objective here is that the ball, once received by one of the blue players, has to be retained for a few seconds, in this case 4 seconds, before they move the ball to another teammate. And the red team doesn't try to win the ball, but adjust their position as it moves from one player to the other. So this can be a real workout. 4 seconds seems a long time, but in this case, we see the 10 play high to the number 11. Now the whole red team has to adjust from defending the 10 now to defending the 11. If the ball was then played across the field to the 7, then we also have to shift. So it's a real workout and a real good way for a coach to show their team how to maintain their defensive shape. And this is a great one to have videoed.
And so we're coming very much to the end here. And what I'd like David to do briefly is discuss just some of the pros and cons as he sees it about this formation to system. And I think before I turn it to David, I just want to be very clear that it's certainly in the philosophy of coaching education with United Soccer Coaches that it's these are suggestions, good ideas, hopefully, provocative ideas, but we want every coach to do the best they can in their environment with their players and in their context. So we hope these are helpful and useful, and some you can employ and some you may save for later. But by no means are we saying this is the only way to play this formation and turn it into a system. And with that in mind, I'll turn it over to David for a few concluding comments.
Thanks, Ian. So we talked at the beginning about the reasons why I chose the 1-3-5-2 to present some of those features. And here we have an abbreviated list of some of the reasons why you may choose this system. We've talked about the importance of creating width. 7 and 11 certainly do that. We try to get them in high positions. When we receive the ball, can we try and bypass 2 lines of the opponent's defense, that being the striker line and the midfield line? Can my 7 and 11 get beyond their midfield into that space between the defense and midfield? If they can, then we're in good attacking positions. That might be a throw from the goalkeeper. The mobility of the strikers becomes important if they stay centrally, they work as a unit, work as a team, and occupy the central defenders. And that will then start creating some doubt in the minds of the 2 fullbacks. Do they go out wide to defend the 7 and 11, or do they maintain and pinch in to try and provide support for the central defenders in the event that they get beaten by the 2 strikers? The wide players can certainly move higher into those positions once the ball is played into the striker's position as well. So that gives you some level of confidence when that ball gets into the strikers that our wide players can get forward. And that is the same with our central midfield players, particularly the 8 and the 10. They must stagger, and the number 6 provides us some level of insurance and confidence in case the opponent was able to force a turnover. The pass over the defense sometimes is an option, and if we can turn the opponent, then we start to press high with all of our players moving forward, including our goalkeeper. And then the creative part, the players in and around the central positions, right in front of the goal, and the combination between our 8, our 10, our 9s, even our 11s and 7s coming in off the touchline, make this a very, very creative looking system, and the potential really for us to wreak havoc right in the middle there in front of goal. And
to the defending side of things?
Yeah, so the defending, I like the back 3 players playing in a zonal position. You asked me if I would have them staggered. I wouldn't. I'd try and keep them in a line, but the ability for them to move as a unit, both laterally, left and right, and also laterally left and right, and then vertically straight forward, and also moving back. The horizontal shift becomes important as a team. Can we make the area compact in and around the ball, and can we shift from one side of the field to the other to do so. We can reduce the number of lines in our field. So by pressing our defense forward and dropping our forward line back, we can create a 3 lines of defense, a 1-5-5, which is actually something you see very much at the professional game, particularly when a team is in the lead and it wants to hold on to that lead in a 1-3-5-2 system. We can press high because we have players committed high. We've got to try and win the ball back early. And our recovery runs, as we saw in that activity, where do we want our 8, our 10, and our 9s to work back? Do we want them to press from the attacking side of the ball, or do we want them to get into a goal side position? And then lastly, and most importantly, certainly defensively, is the role of the number 6. That person has to be athletic, and they have to be able to provide a screen across the back 3, but also the ability on occasions to move into the wide positions to support the number 7 and number 11.
And so, coaches, we'd like to leave it there with gratitude to David. David, thank you. Excellent job.
Thank you.
This was our presentation, one of 4 of different formations, in this case, the 1-3-5-2. And again, this is part of a 6-part series with an introduction and final review, and the 4 formation system presentations sandwiched in between, with the activity plans available for you as well. So thank you very much for your attention today. Thank you to David, and we look forward to you joining us for the rest of the presentations.